A question I get asked all the time is, can you use the M50 for professional work? Well, all of that was shot on the M50, so the answer is an unequivocal yes. You can use the M50 for professional work. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Or if you want to know, like, what I actually mean by that, yes, the M50 can be used for professional work. And that's where it ends. It's not it should, it's not it will provide professional results every time. It means you can. You're able to produce content that a professional would be proud of. Alright, let's give that B-roll a backstory, because obviously I didn't shoot it because I'm not a professional. I'm a content creator, a YouTuber. I'm not producing commercial content. The other day, I was hanging out with my friend Cody Scott. He is a professional filmmaker who has one of, if not the fastest growing production company in the Cape Fear region. Currently, he is shooting with a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 6K, and he shoots almost everything in 6K RAW. I thought it would be interesting to see what a professional could do with a budget camera. So my intention is you to take any one of these lenses, or all of them. You can use whatever you want to film this segment. What do you think?
Let's do it, yeah. Okay.
And to be perfectly honest, it just confirmed everything that I already knew about filmmaking, is that the camera doesn't really matter. If you focus on your composition and your lighting, your audio, your sound design, your music choice, you can make a cheap camera look amazing. Now, the first thing that Cody struggled with coming from a cinema camera was the dynamic range. And what he did, in order to hide the fact that he didn't have good dynamic range, he did what he could to avoid any over or underexposing in the image. And that is a huge deal. If you can avoid overexposing or underexposing in your image, especially them both at the same time, your video is gonna look way better. Going back to my last video, I was shooting behind the scenes of one of Cody's productions. And if you look at this shot looks great. And then when I turned around and filmed a different shot, you can tell without even thinking about it that this shot just doesn't look as good. The framing is okay. I didn't do bad with the framing, except that the windows were behind him. It messed with my exposure, it messed with my dynamic range. This was at the same settings, same lenses. And why is that? It's because of the dynamic range. Once you can see blown out highlights, you know for a fact that someone shot that with a more inexpensive camera, because the biggest thing that you can tell the difference of between a cinema and a cheap camera is the dynamic range. Another thing that is wildly important in all professional, and definitely just as important as lighting and creativity, is composition. You can have something well lit with great audio, but if it's not composed properly, people are going to notice that. Cody almost always uses the rule of thirds and only breaks them when he's doing so with a purpose. If he can't explain to you the purpose of why he's breaking the rule of thirds, he doesn't. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite subject, the actual gear. Because yes, the camera doesn't matter, but something that does is the lens. Cody could not have gotten the shots that he got as good as he got with the kit lens. He used the Viltrox 23mm f1.4 and the Viltrox 56mm f1.4 for this video. Other than that, Cody didn't use anything. He didn't use any filters, he didn't use any stabilizers. All he did was shoot handheld with lenses without stabilization. I think he stabilized in post where he needed to, but the M50 and those two lenses was all that he used in order to make that segment. Now, settings. This is important. The settings that you use are very important when you're making a professional video. First of all, unless you're intentionally doing it, do not overcrank your shutter. Do not undercrank your shutter. If you are shooting at 24 frames per second, you want your shutter at 1/50th of a second on the M50. If you are shooting at 30 frames a second, you want your shutter at 1/60th of a second. And if you're shooting 60 frames per second, you want your shutter at 1/125th of a second. If you overcrank your shutter, your image will not look natural. Our eyes perceive motion blur, and if the camera's not picking that up, it's going to look weird.
You can see such a huge difference in your highlight roll-off when you change your ISO, even just slightly on this camera. Wow, it's very sensitive, but it's almost like day and night. 200 is where you keep it at?
Usually.
It looks really good at 200. I think I'm gonna keep it there for this shot.
ISO. You want your ISO as low as possible. If your image is too dark, you can raise your ISO up. Anything above 1600 though is going to introduce noise. And the more noise you have to start out with, the more noise that you will get when you start pushing the footage in post-production. And now for your aperture. And your aperture is going to give you the most control stylistically over your image. Basically, the lower the number, the wider the aperture, the more light, and the shallower your depth of field is, meaning the less you will have in focus. The higher your number, f5.6, f8, f11, you're going to get a deeper depth of field and have less light. Something like the kit lens only goes down to f3.5, whereas you get roughly like, 6 times the amount of light when you go to f1.4. Cody doesn't actually like to go below 2.8 with his aperture. He understands that having a shallow depth of field is not the most important thing for professional content. For you and your content, you need to adjust your aperture for the look that you are trying to achieve. Don't let anyone tell you that you should have it wide open or that you should keep it closed down. No, you need to set it up until you like how it looks. Sometimes your image is going to be a bit dark and you may have to adjust with your ISO. To be perfectly honest, if your settings are at f3.5, ISO 1600, and shutter speed of 1/50th of a second, and your image is still too dark, your room is too dark. You have to introduce more light. There's no way of getting around it. You cannot just keep boosting the ISO or widening the aperture in order to get proper exposure with the M50. Lighting gear is the most important gear that you can get after your first microphone and camera. Now, another couple things that Cody did in order to get as much out of the M50 as possible, he changed his picture profile. He used a profile called Marvel's Advanced. The other thing that he did, and this is something that I didn't understand. I'd seen the setting in the menu, but I'd never used it, is he turned on the auto light optimizer. And basically what this did made the roll off between the highlights and the shadows better. So this is something that I'm gonna have to be testing out and trying out, but it's something that Cody's like, definitely dude, if you are shooting higher dynamic range stuff, use the auto light optimizer. He probably would suggest me using it all the time. The last thing that is important if you're trying to produce professional video content is editing. Now what Cody did is broken up into basically 3 things. 1, cutting the film together. 2, adding sound. And then 3, color grading. Those are the 3 main things that you're doing in editing. Color grading, I don't have any experience with. Luckily, Cody has just released multiple color grading tutorials on his channel, so I will link one of those above. You can go out and check him out for any of your color grading needs. Sound design. I don't know if he's done a video on this yet, but this is the most important thing that Cody does that sets his videos apart from what I do, because I rarely do this, and that is sound design. Watch this segment without the sound design. Now watch it with the sound design. Without any music, without anything like that, you can tell a huge difference. You don't feel like you're in the segment that's completely silent, but you kind of feel it around you when you have the clanking of the balls together, when you have the cue and the spin and all of that. It looks and feels and sounds more like you're there. Now, cutting together is something I don't really feel like I can teach you. It's something that you will have to learn on your own, with practice, with failure, with success, figure out what works and what doesn't. Everyone cuts together their footage differently. So your style might be different than my style, and that's something that you need to learn. I think that about sums it up. Thank you to Cody for helping me with this video. It was really illuminating for myself, and I'm sure it was for a lot of you as well. If you liked this video or found it helpful, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you all in the next video.